Hello, I'm Dr. Ann Davis, and we've been working on how to come into the presence of God. That's a pretty exciting topic. I've been having fun anyway. And we're doing this through the story of Jacob's ladder. And you remember that Jacob had a dream, and he saw angels ascending and descending from heaven, and God was at the top. And the imagery of this dream encourages us to think that we can actually come into God's presence. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a look at how all of God's children are called to change. And we're going to do this with a verse in Romans. Paul says, I urge you, brethren, you can just hear him, I urge you, brethren, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice. Well, let's zero in on the concept of living and holy sacrifice. First of all, a living sacrifice is not a dead sacrifice, because in ancient Israel, the animal was killed and then it was brought to the altar to be burned. And of course, the animal had to be perfect. It had to be without blemish, because what we give to God has to be perfect. Well, we now are to be a living sacrifice, so we must give to God ourselves, and we must make ourselves as perfect as possible. Now, you know, and fortunately God only sees the heart. But we're going to take a look here now at how we become this living sacrifice. And you remember when we were working on that sin offering in ancient Israel, that it wasn't enough just to bring the animal, to let that sweet aroma of the animal float up to God. First you had to acknowledge your sin, to say, I have sinned, and then you had to desire in your heart to truly change. That's what repentance is. You had to confess your guilt, and finally you could bring that animal. So what has happened now with Jesus, with Yeshua, something very dramatically different has happened. Let's take a look, because Bible tells us that Yeshua has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. So he was the perfect sacrifice. He was unblemished. He was without sin. But wait a minute. We are to be the living sacrifice. You know, just like he was a sacrifice, we're to be a living sacrifice. And in order to be a living sacrifice, we have to be holy. We have to be a holy sacrifice. Well, how are we going to be this holy sacrifice? We remember that in the fall, sin came upon us. So we are all born under sin. That's true. We're all born under sin. But let's look at how Yeshua is taking us to this higher principle. You remember the woman who was the adulteress, and the penalty for adultery was death by stoning. And the people brought her to Yeshua and said, you know, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to, you know, bring upon her the judgment of death by stoning? But he says to all the people around her, he who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. Well, our Christian emphasis tends to be on sin. We're sinners. You know, a Jewish friend of mine said, you know, well, we Jews remember that we're created in God's image. So we want to elevate ourselves, you know, to be in that image that God has created of us. Now, to understand this concept, we have to take a look at the Hebraic sense of time. And I'm going to make that passage come alive where Jesus says, well, you know, who here is without sin? You know, we all are under sin, but we can all grow into this holiness. Let me show you the Hebraic sense of time. In the Hebraic sense of time, God is in time, time is God, God is throughout all aspects of time. Let's look in the beginning. In the beginning, at the time of the creation, mankind was perfect. It was before the fall, and we were perfect. We were in God's image. And if we could go back to the Garden of Eden, we could be a holy sacrifice because we would be without sin. In the future, at the end times, God's going to create that righteousness in us again. We're going to be righteous. But now God says, be holy as he is holy. So we are in the process of growing into that holiness, which we can do, you know, if we there are certain things we can do, all right? And what we're going to do in the next session is we're going to take a look at how we can become holy, and we can become holy by renewing our minds. And that's going to be our next session. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you some tips. Right now, you can grow into that holiness so that you can come into the presence of God. And that's what we're going to work on in the next time. Shalom.